On Sunday, November 25, 2018, messages went out from Kelsey Bereth's phone. One reached her mother. Another reached Patrick Frazee. The words appeared to come from Kelsey as if she were alive and moving through an ordinary day. But investigators would later say Kelsey had already been killed 3 days earlier inside her own condominium in Woodland Park, Colorado.
There's blood on the wall here. There's blood on the wall here.
It's the chilling moment that a woman reveals what really happened in this house of horrors.
When you came in, what did you see?
When I first walked in, I saw blood all over the floor. I saw blood up the wall.
She spent 4 hours cleaning up after the brutal murder of 29-year-old mom, Kelsey Bereth. Kelsey was beaten to death inside her home near Colorado Springs by her fiancé, 33-year-old Patrick Frazee, last Thanksgiving. This video shows Kelsey food shopping with her baby daughter at a Safeway supermarket hours before her murder.
If that was true, then someone else was holding her phone, someone who wanted the world to believe she had simply stepped away. That same day, the phone's location data placed it far from Teller County, pinging near Gooding, Idaho, roughly 700 miles from where Kelsey had last been seen on surveillance video. Why would a missing mother's phone travel that distance when she did? Who was sending messages that sounded like her, and why take the risk of creating a digital trail? And if Kelsey's silence began on Thanksgiving, how did the story of her life keep typing after she stopped? To understand how a holiday morning became a case built on cameras, cell towers, cleanup, and a courtroom verdict, investigators started with the last time Kelsey Bereth was seen. Welcome to Forgotten Faces, new cases, real timelines, and courtroom outcomes. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Kelsey was 29 years old, a flight instructor, and the mother of a 1-year-old daughter named Kaylee. She lived in Woodland Park, Colorado. She was engaged to Patrick Frazee, a rancher who lived near Florissant, Colorado, but the two did not live together. Their relationship included shared custody of their daughter, and that arrangement meant exchanges happened by plan and by timing, the kind of routine that looks normal until a routine breaks. On Thanksgiving Day, November 22, 2018, Kelsey appeared on Safeway surveillance video in Woodland Park at 12:27 p.m. She walked into the store with her daughter in a car seat, pulled a shopping cart, and moved through the entrance like a parent with errands to do on a holiday. It was not dramatic footage. It was the kind of clip police later released because it was the last confirmed public sighting. A timestamp, a doorway, and a woman who had no idea she was being recorded for history. What happened after that point became the spine of the investigation and also the central dispute. Patrick Frazee told police that later that Thanksgiving Day, he met Kelsey to pick up their daughter. That statement placed him in contact with her in the hours after the Safeway video, but it did not explain why, within days, Kelsey would be unreachable to everyone who expected to hear from her. Authorities would later present a very different account of Thanksgiving inside Kelsey's condominium, based primarily on the testimony of Crystal Lee Kenny, Frazee's former girlfriend. Kenny told jurors that Frazee described a plan inside the condo. He told Kelsey to guess the scent of a candle while she was blindfolded. Kenny testified that Frazee said he wrapped a sweater around Kelsey's head and struck her repeatedly with a baseball bat in the living room. Kenny also testified that Kelsey's 1-year-old daughter was in another room at the time. In court, those details were not introduced as rumor. They were introduced as what Kenny said Frazee told her, and the state presented physical evidence from the condo and the ranch to argue that her account matched what investigators found. Kenny's testimony did not begin on Thanksgiving. She told the jury that months earlier, Frazee tried to arrange Kelsey's death through her. In September 2018, Kenny testified Frazee instructed her to poison Kelsey's coffee with an unspecified substance. Kenny said she brought the coffee to Kelsey's home, but Kelsey did not drink it. In October 2018, Kenny said Frazee's instructions changed. He wanted her to use a metal pipe to strike Kelsey on the back of the head. Kenny testified she brought a pipe to Kelsey's home, opened a car door, then heard a dog bark and left without acting. The prosecution treated those accounts as evidence of planning. The defense would later argue that they were stories told by a witness who had a reason to shift blame. After Thanksgiving, the timeline moved in a way prosecutors argued was both deliberate and revealing. Kenny testified that on Thanksgiving night, Frazee called her and instructed her to drive from Idaho to Woodland Park. The purpose, she said, was not to search for Kelsey. It was to clean the scene where Kelsey had been killed. Kenny told the court she arrived at Kelsey's condominium and used bleach and chemical solutions to scrub away evidence. She described bagging items connected to what she said were blood traces and removing property from the home. According to her testimony, she took Kelsey's phone, her purse, and her gun. Then, as she drove back toward Idaho, Kenny said she sent text messages from Kelsey's phone, messages to Kelsey's mother and to Frazee under Frazee's direction. Public reporting cited in the case file confirms that messages were sent from Kelsey's phone after investigators said she was already dead, and Kenny's testimony gave the state a person, a motive, and a method for how that could happen. On November 24, 2018, another camera captured a different piece of the picture. Surveillance footage showed Frazee and Kenny at a gas station near Frazee's residence in the Florissant area as he filled a 5-gallon gas can. The prosecution treated that fuel purchase as a physical step in a larger story. Kenny testified that Frazee burned Kelsey's body in a water trough on his ranch using gasoline and wood, and the state argued that the gas can footage helped lock in the timing of preparation. Kenny testified that after the killing, Frazee placed Kelsey's body into a black tote and transporting it from Woodland Park to his ranch near Florissant. She told jurors that he burned the body in a water trough. She also testified that he collected charred remains and disposed of them either at a landfill or in a river. The precise disposal location was not publicly confirmed. Investigators searched a landfill in Fountain, Colorado, as a potential disposal site. The body was never recovered, but trial testimony and exhibits were used to argue that burning had taken place at the ranch. Back in Idaho, Kenny testified she took Kelsey's phone and purse into her backyard and burned them. She said she placed the ashes in a box, put the box into a plastic bag, and disposed of it in a trash bin on her way to work. Twin Falls police officer Josh Hayes later testified the charred phone remains were found in a burn pile about 500 feet from Kenny's residence. In a case where an entire body was missing, small physical fragments carried weight. They were pieces of proof that something had been destroyed and that the destruction traced back to a specific place. While those steps unfolded in the background, the people who knew Kelsey experienced the case the way families often do at first, as a week of unanswered calls that makes no sense. Kelsey's mother, Cheryl Bereth, went without communication from her daughter for a full week. Cheryl described Kelsey as someone who loved her dog, her family, her friends, and her job, and she told authorities Kelsey was not the kind that runs off. On December 2, 2018, Cheryl contacted Patrick Frazee to ask where Kelsey was. Frazee told Cheryl a story that would later collide with the evidence. He said Kelsey ended their relationship on Thanksgiving and agreed to 50-50 custody of their daughter. That same day, Cheryl reported Kelsey missing to the Woodland Park Police Department. A missing person report seems simple on paper, but it starts a clock. From that moment, silence is no longer just personal, it becomes a matter of record. During the missing person period, Frazee also communicated with law enforcement. In a recorded call referenced in the case file, he claimed Kelsey contacted him to end the relationship. He said she was not suicidal, and he mentioned returning her personal belongings, including her handgun, saying he intended to give her space. According to the record, Frazee later made a statement to the Teller County Department of Human Services, claiming he and Kelsey communicated via text for 2 days after Thanksgiving and spoke on the phone afterward. Statements prosecutors argued were false if Kelsey had been killed on Thanksgiving Day. As investigators worked, agencies joined the effort. Woodland Park Police, the Teller County Sheriff's Office, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and Twin Falls Police in Idaho. Warrants were executed for Kelsey's condominium and for Frazee's home and ranch. Investigators sought digital records, cell phone data, and text messages to map contact and movement. Cell tower data suggested both Frazee's and Kelsey's phones were near Kelsey's home around the time she went missing. Investigators also said Kenny's phone tracked to the area near Kelsey's apartment on November 24 and 25. At the same time, court documents cited in the file noted that Frazee's phone had no location history recorded during the dates surrounding the murder, a gap the state treated as meaningful and the defense could treat as the absence of proof. Search operations followed the warrants. Investigators searched Kelsey's condominium in Woodland Park, then turned to Frazee's home and ranch near Florissant. They also searched a landfill in Fountain, Colorado, because the disposal destination Kenny described was not publicly confirmed. The searches did not recover Kelsey's body, but prosecutors later pointed to physical indicators that supported the account of violence, cleanup, and burning. Investigators documented blood evidence inside the condominium, and trial testimony described burn site evidence at the ranch, including melted black plastic consistent with a tote. The phone lead did more than point to a state line, it narrowed the circle. After Kelsey's phone appeared in Idaho, investigators linked that movement to Crystal Lee Kenny in Twin Falls. Records cited in the case file placed Kenny's phone near Kelsey's condominium on November 24 and 25, consistent with her later testimony about traveling to Woodland Park. Kenny testified that, at Frazee's instruction, she also took Kelsey's gun to Idaho. Investigators traced the gun after it was given to an acquaintance. When Twin Falls police said on December 22 that they believed they had found possible evidence, it was within this Idaho footprint that investigators tied to the burned phone. On December 12, 2018, police released the Safeway surveillance video to the public. The decision served two purposes. It showed the last confirmed sighting, and it told the community that Kelsey's disappearance had shifted from private worry to a formal search. Then the digital trail took investigators out of Colorado. Location data placed Kelsey's phone in Idaho. The state argued the ping was the hinge that connected the missing mother in Woodland Park to a woman in Twin Falls. Investigators followed that data to Crystal Lee Kenny, and the case moved from missing to homicide with a speed that often only arrives when a lead is that specific. On December 21, 2018, Patrick Frazee was arrested. He was held without bail through trial. On December 22, Twin Falls police said they believed they had found possible evidence related to Kelsey's case. On December 24, Frazee was criminally charged with murder. On December 31, formal charges were filed. 2 counts of first-degree murder after deliberation listed as alternative counts, 3 counts of solicitation to commit first-degree murder after deliberation, and 1 count of tampering with a deceased human body. As the criminal case formed, the custody of Kelsey's daughter became its own legal reality. In December 2018, a custody hearing resulted in Kelsey's parents being granted temporary custody, while the Teller County Department of Human Services retained legal custody. It was an administrative decision made under crisis, but it underscored what the evidence already implied. Kelsey was not available to parent, and the system had to decide who would. The investigation also reached into Frazee's ranch records. Documents seized from the ranch showed he had defaulted on a $70,000 loan. The case file does not claim motive from that fact, and the court record as provided does not link it to the homicide as a proven reason. But it became one more item presented as context in a case where the prosecution alleged months of planning. On February 8, 2019, Crystal Lee Kenny pleaded guilty to 1 count of tampering with physical evidence, a Class 6 felony, and agreed to testify against Frazee. Her plea allocution established what she was admitting to in her own words. She said she learned Frazee had committed a homicide around November 22, knew law enforcement would investigate, and moved the victim's cell phone with the intent to impair its availability in the investigation. She did not plead guilty to murder. She did not claim she was forced. The plea positioned her as a witness who had participated in obstruction, and the state would rely on her to describe what she said Frazee did. 11 days later, on February 19, 2019, a preliminary hearing was held in Cripple Creek. Prosecutors presented evidence including Kenny's testimony about the murder method, the cleanup, and the phone disposal, and a judge found probable cause to proceed. In May 2019, Frazee pleaded not guilty. From that point, the case headed toward trial with its central problem unchanged. The state would have to prove a homicide without recovering Kelsey's body. The trial ran from November 1 through November 18, 2019 in the Teller County District Court, with Judge Scott Sells presiding. District Attorney Dan May's office presented the case with prosecutors including Bate Reed and Jennifer Veman. Investigators testified, including CBI agent Greg Slater and Woodland Park Police Commander Christopher Adams. The prosecution's theory was that Frazee planned Kelsey's murder for months, tried to outsource it to Kenny multiple times, and when those attempts failed, killed Kelsey himself on Thanksgiving Day inside her condo, then used Kenny to erase evidence and misdirect the investigation. Kenny was the prosecution's central witness, and the state had to confront the way her testimony would be received, as both an insider account and a negotiated one. On the stand, Kenny described her relationship with Frazee and her interactions with Kelsey's life only through what she said Frazee pulled her into. She described the alleged solicitation attempts in September and October. She described the Thanksgiving night call that sent her to Woodland Park. She described cleaning the condominium with chemicals and removing the phone. She described driving back to Idaho and sending messages from Kelsey's device. She described burning the phone and purse in her backyard and disposing of the remains. The prosecution also presented the video evidence that framed Kelsey's last known day, the Safeway footage placing her in public with her daughter, and the gas station surveillance placing Frazee and Kenny together around the fuel purchase days later. It was a case built on ordinary cameras capturing ordinary moments that, under investigation, became extraordinary markers. From there, prosecutors layered in the digital record. Cell tower evidence placed phones near Kelsey's condominium around the time she disappeared. Location data showed Kelsey's phone in Idaho. Investigators testified that Kenny's phone traveled to the area of the condominium on November 24 and 25, aligning with her account of driving from Idaho to clean and then leaving. And the absence of recorded location history from Frazee's phone in the relevant period, as cited in court documents, was presented as part of the overall pattern the state argued pointed toward deliberate concealment. Physical evidence was presented in careful, non-graphic terms. Investigators described blood evidence found at Kelsey's condo, consistent with Kenny's claim that she cleaned. They described items at the ranch burn site, including melted plastic consistent with a tote, supporting the allegation that something sizable had been burned. Testimony referenced a 5-gallon gas can and the surveillance of it being filled. Twin Falls testimony tied charred phone remains to a burn pile near Kenny's home. A DNA analyst testified during the trial, though the publicly described material in the case file does not detail the specific DNA findings. Another witness introduced a different kind of evidence. A former inmate, whose identity was not publicly disclosed, testified that Frazee solicited him from jail to kill witnesses while Frazee awaited trial. According to the record, the testimony included descriptions of handwritten notes and statements attributed to Frazee about wanting Kenny dead and claiming prosecutors put words in her mouth. The state offered that testimony to argue consciousness of guilt and an effort to obstruct justice even after arrest, while the defense could characterize it as unreliable jailhouse evidence. The defense position, as reflected in the record, focused on doubt and credibility. Frazee's attorney Adam Steigerwald emphasized the lack of a recovered body and argued the state's case was circumstantial. The defense attacked Kenny's reliability, pointing out that she initially lied to FBI agents and that her plea agreement gave her a reason to cooperate. In closing arguments, the defense described the prosecution's narrative as made up, aiming to convince jurors that the story was a construction of one witness rather than proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The prosecution answered by arguing that Kenny's testimony was corroborated by independent evidence. The phone's movement into Idaho, the timing of messages sent from Kelsey's device, surveillance footage, the physical remnants of a burned phone near Kenny's home, and the burn site indicators on Frazee's ranch. CBI agent Greg Slater testified that without Kenny's cooperation and testimony, the investigation would have stalled, an admission that her role was pivotal, and also a reminder of how narratives and evidence can depend on a single person deciding to speak. By the time the jury received the case, the question was no longer whether Kelsey was missing. The state's position was that she had been killed and that the evidence showed how. The defense position was that the state had not proven it beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury deliberated starting around 11 a.m. on November 18, 2019. By approximately 2:45 p.m., they returned their verdict. Patrick Frazee was found guilty of first-degree murder after deliberation, guilty of tampering with a deceased human body, and guilty on 3 counts of solicitation to commit first-degree murder after deliberation. The alternative murder counts were merged. The court moved swiftly from verdict to sentence. Later that same day, Judge Scott Sells imposed life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder conviction. He also imposed 48 years for each of the 3 solicitation convictions, years total to run consecutively, and 12 years for tampering with a deceased human body, also consecutive. The total sentence was life without parole plus 156 years. At sentencing, Judge Sells explained why he was imposing the maximum punishment. In a brief paraphrase of his remarks reported in trial coverage, he told Frazee that Kelsey spent her last night caring for him and that he repaid that kindness the next morning by killing her, and he stated that Frazee's crimes deserved the absolute maximum and that he intended to deliver it. Prosecutors also emphasized what they argued the evidence showed: months of planning and an effort to erase Kelsey's existence after she was gone, not just by removing her from her home, but by trying to keep her phone speaking in her place. Kelsey Bereth's body was never recovered, but the verdict and the sentence treated the homicide as proven and the obstruction as part of what made it possible to commit. A mother stopped answering her phone, and someone tried to keep that phone speaking for her. A grocery store camera captured the last ordinary errand. A gas station camera captured a fuel purchase. Cell towers and pings mapped a device's journey across state lines. A witness described cleaning and disposal and admitted, under oath and under a guilty plea, that she moved the phone to impair the investigation. And a court imposed punishment that ended the case at sentencing, with life without parole and an additional 156 years. If there is a lesson grounded in what the court record shows here, it is that silence can be manufactured, and so can the appearance of normal life, sometimes through something as small as a text sent from the wrong hands. In cases built on timing, data, and contradictions, those small traces are often what prevent a person from simply vanishing into someone else's story. If you want more fact-driven documentary narrations built strictly from evidence and courtroom outcomes, subscribe to support this work and help keep these stories told with care.